My name is Danna, and I am 38 years old. To my family, the illustrious Roman dynasty of Seattle, I'm nothing more than a stain on their reputation. A failure who wastes her life turning wrenches as a grease monkey in the army while they close million-dollar deals. But they didn't know the truth. When the solid oak door of the cabin my grandmother left me exploded inward, shattered by a C4 breaching charge in the dead of a Colorado winter night, my hand didn't even shake. Viper, the budget-cut mercenary my cousin Julian hired to evict me, expected to find a weeping, terrified woman begging for mercy. Instead, through the settling dust and smoke, he found me sitting comfortably in my leather armchair, taking a slow sip of black coffee, with the cold steel of a heavy-caliber sniper rifle resting casually across my thighs. And when the beam of his tactical light swept over the patch on my chest, the eagle clutching the lightning bolt, I watched his pupils dilate in absolute, primal terror. My cousin thought he was kicking a poor relative out of a tear-down shack. He didn't realize he had just declared war on a Tier 1 operator of the Joint Special Operations Command, right here on American soil. Let me know what state you are watching from in the comments, and hit that subscribe button right now if you believe that you should never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book knows 18 different ways to neutralize the threat before it even enters the room. The wind howling through the Colorado Rockies has a specific sound. It's a low, mournful moan that rattles the pine trees and strips the warmth from anything living. It's the kind of cold that settles in your bones and reminds you of your mortality. Most people find it terrifying. I find it clarifying. I sat in the high-backed leather armchair, the one my grandfather used to smoke his pipe in, with the only light in the room coming from the dying embers in the stone fireplace. On my lap lay a copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. I've read it 100 times, mostly in the back of transport planes over Syria or in dugouts in the Korengal Valley. Page 42. Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it. Stoicism isn't just a philosophy for me, it's a survival mechanism. It's the off switch for fear. My family thinks I fix trucks. They think I change oil filters and rotate tires for a living. They think the scars on my hands are from slipping wrenches, not from shrapnel or knife fights in alleyways in Damascus. Let them think that. Silence is a soldier's first layer of armor. But tonight, that silence was about to be broken. I didn't hear footsteps. The snow outside was 3 feet deep and fresh. It muffles everything, swallowing sound like a thick wool blanket. But I felt them. A subtle vibration in the floorboards, the displacement of air, the frantic amateurish rhythm of men who are used to intimidation, not warfare. I closed the book gently and placed it on the side table next to my steaming mug of coffee. I didn't reach for the phone to call 911. The sheriff's station was 40 minutes away down an icy switchback road, and besides, Julian had probably already paid them off. This wasn't a police matter. This was a perimeter breach. I picked up the Macmillan TAC-50 sitting beside the chair. It's a beast of a rifle, heavy, ungainly in close quarters for anyone who hasn't trained with it until it feels like an extension of their own limb. I rested the barrel across my thigh, the muzzle brake pointing towards the front door. I took a sip of coffee. Black, no sugar. Boom. The explosion wasn't Hollywood loud. It was a sharp, concussive thump that sucked the air out of the room for a split second. The front door, solid oak, hand-carved by my great-grandfather, didn't just open, it disintegrated. Splinters the size of steak knives sprayed into the room, clattering against the stone hearth. The freezing wind rushed in instantly, carrying the acrid metallic stink of C4 and burnt wood. Through the swirling smoke and snow, a silhouette stepped into the frame. He was big, wearing tactical gear that looked expensive but hadn't seen a day of real wear. Night vision goggles pushed up on his helmet, a suppressed AR-15 raised high. "Get the hell up, you bitch!" he screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "Get out of this house right now if you don't want to die." It was the standard opening line of a bully. He wanted shock and awe. He wanted me screaming, crying, begging for my life. He wanted the narrative my cousin Julian had sold him. The helpless poor female relative squatting in a valuable property. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just watched him over the rim of my coffee mug. The mercenary, let's call him Viper, based on the tacky snake tattoo peeking out from his collar, took another step forward, kicking debris aside. I said, "Move. Are you deaf?" I set the mug down. The ceramic clicked softly against the wood of the table. That tiny sound was louder than his shouting. Then my hand moved to the bolt of the rifle. Clack, clack. The sound of a heavy caliber round being chambered is unmistakable. It's a mechanical, final sound. It cuts through bravado like a hot knife through butter. Viper froze. His brain was trying to process the image in front of him. A woman in a flannel shirt and jeans, sitting calmly in a destroyed living room, holding a weapon capable of stopping a light armored vehicle from a mile away. "You didn't knock, Sergeant," I said. My voice was low, steady, devoid of any emotion. It wasn't a question. He blinked, the flashlight on his rifle wavering. "What?" "Your stance," I continued, analyzing him like a biology specimen. "Shoulders too tight, finger resting on the trigger guard, not indexed. You were Army, but you didn't last, did you? Dishonorable discharge. Or just a failure to adapt." "Shut up," Viper roared, but he took a half step back. He swung his rifle light directly into my face, trying to blind me. I didn't blink. I let the light hit me. I wanted him to see. I wasn't wearing my full combat rattle, no plate carrier, no helmet, just my shirt. But pinned to the left side of that flannel shirt, right over my heart, was a small, subdued patch. I had taken it out of my safe just for tonight. The beam of light focused on it. The eagle. The lightning bolt. The sword. The insignia of the Joint Special Operations Command. The unit that doesn't exist on paper. The people the president calls when diplomacy fails and he needs a problem to vanish from the face of the earth. I saw the recognition hit him like a physical blow. I saw his pupils dilate, swallowing the iris. I saw the blood drain from his face, leaving him pale beneath the tactical grease paint. He knew. Every soldier, active or washed out, knew the legends of the Tier 1 operators. He knew he wasn't looking at a mechanic. He was looking at a ghost, his weapon lowered. Not by choice, but by the sheer weight of realization that he was outclassed in a way he couldn't even comprehend. If he pulled that trigger, he wouldn't just be killing a civilian. He would be signing a death warrant that would be executed by the most dangerous people on the planet. "Code Red!" he screamed into his radio, his voice shrinking into a squeak of terror. "Abort! Abort! It's a trap. She's one of them." He scrambled backward, tripping over the debris of the door he had just destroyed. He looked at me one last time, expecting me to fire, expecting the pink mist. I just smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf watching a rabbit try to run on ice. "Run fast, Sergeant," I whispered, though I knew he couldn't hear me over the wind. "The snow is getting deep out there." He turned and bolted into the darkness, abandoning his team, abandoning his mission, running from the demon he had just found sitting by the fire. Julian thought he was sending a cleaner to take out the trash. He had no idea he had just knocked on the door of the devil herself. And as the cold wind swirled around my ankles, I took another sip of coffee. The war had finally come home. And I was ready to welcome it. To understand why a man would send a paramilitary hit squad to blow up a wooden door in the middle of a blizzard, you have to understand the Roman family. You have to go back 72 hours. Back to the rain-slicked streets of Seattle, to a world that smelled of old money, heavy cologne, and moral decay. We were at Giovanni's, a high-end Italian restaurant downtown with a view of the Space Needle piercing the gray clouds. It was the reception following my grandmother's funeral. The mood in the private dining room wasn't somber. It was celebratory. The matriarch was dead, which meant the trust funds were finally unlocking. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, isolated, like a distant cousin no one remembered inviting. I was wearing a simple black dress I'd bought at a thrift store near the base, unadorned, practical. Around me, my relatives were draped in designer silk and Italian wool. The air was thick with the sound of expensive silverware clinking against china, and the popping of corks from bottles of vintage Chianti Classico. At the head of the table sat Julian. My cousin, 45 years old, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than my annual salary as an enlisted soldier. He was currently dismantling a lobster thermidor with a kind of aggressive surgical precision. He cracked a claw with a silver cracker, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the room, and sucked the meat out with a wet, satisfied noise. "Pass the butter," he commanded, not looking at anyone specific. A waiter rushed to obey. I took a sip of my ice water. It was the only thing I was consuming. I didn't have the stomach for their food, and I certainly didn't have the stomach for their conversation. "It's a mercy, really," my Aunt Linda said, her voice carrying over the low hum of jazz music. She was Julian's mother, a woman whose face was pulled so tight by plastic surgery that she looked permanently surprised. She swirled her wine glass, staring directly at me. Mom was getting so frail, and honestly, it's a relief she doesn't have to see. Certain disappointments continue. The table went quiet. All eyes turned to me. "Oh, don't look so sour, Danna," Linda continued, flashing a veneer white smile. "We're just being realistic. You're 38 years old. You drive a truck that sounds like a lawnmower. You live in barracks or whatever hole the army puts you in. You're a mechanic, for God's sake, a grease monkey." It broke Mother's heart that a Roman woman would end up with grease under her fingernails instead of a diamond on her finger. "I serve my country, Aunt Linda," I said quietly. My hands were folded on my lap. I could feel the calluses on my palms, the rough skin that came from handling heavy weaponry and climbing over Afghan ridges. "You fix flat tires," Julian corrected, pointing a butter-soaked piece of lobster at me. "Let's call a spade a spade. You're blue-collar labor in a white-collar dynasty. You're the help." I didn't respond. There was no point. They saw the world through a filter of net worth. To them, my service wasn't sacrifice. It was a lack of ambition. The heavy oak doors of the private room opened, and Mr. Henderson walked in. He was my grandmother's estate lawyer, a man with a spine of steel who had been the only person in the room she actually respected. He carried a leather briefcase. "I apologize for the interruption," Henderson said, his voice gravelly. "But as per Mrs. Roman's instructions, the will is to be read immediately following the reception." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The grief, what little there was, evaporated, replaced by a hungry, predatory tension. Julian wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and leaned forward. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Henderson opened the file. He went through the stocks, the bonds, the Seattle real estate. As expected, the bulk of the liquid assets went to Linda and Julian. They smirked, exchanging high fives with their eyes. They were already spending the money in their heads. "And finally," Henderson said, adjusting his glasses, "regarding the property located in the Rocky Mountains, Colorado, the cabin and the surrounding 40 acres of timberland." Julian straightened his tie. "Right, just put that under the development trust." "No," Henderson said. He looked up, his eyes finding mine at the end of the table. "The cabin is bequeathed in its entirety to her granddaughter, Danna Roman." The silence that followed was deafening. It was heavier than the snowstorm I would face 3 days later. "Excuse me?" Julian stood up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. "That's a mistake. Grandmother knew the plan. That land is the cornerstone of the Aspen Ridge Resort project. We have investors lined up." "The text is clear," Henderson read. "To Danna, the only one who visited me without asking for a check. The only one who loved the mountains as I did. May she find the peace there that this family never gave her." "That senile old bat!" Linda shrieked, slamming her wine glass down. Wine sloshed onto the white tablecloth, looking like a blood spatter. "She gave a prime piece of real estate to her? She can't even afford the flight out there." Julian walked down the length of the table. He moved like a shark sensing blood in the water. He stopped right behind my chair. I could smell the wine on his breath and the overwhelming scent of his expensive cologne. "Listen to me, Danna," Julian said, his voice fake friendly, masking a deep, boiling rage. "You don't want that shack. It's a teardown. It's rotting wood and drafts. And have you thought about the property taxes? In that county, they'll eat you alive. You make, what, $40,000 a year? You can't afford to own that land for a single month. I looked straight ahead. I'll manage. No, you won't, Julian snapped, dropping the pretense. He leaned in, placing both hands on the back of my chair, boxing me in. Here is what is going to happen. You're going to sign the deed over to me, right now. Henderson has the papers. In exchange, because I am a generous cousin and I pity you, I will give you $5,000. Cash. 5,000, I repeated. The land is worth $2 million. Not to you, Julian hissed. To you, it's a burden. To you, it's bankruptcy. 5,000 is a lot of money for a grease monkey. You could buy a used Honda, maybe some clothes that don't look like they came from a dumpster. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. I wasn't tall, but I knew how to hold space. I turned to face him. He was softer than me. His skin was smooth, pampered, his eyes were empty. No, I said. Julian laughed, a harsh barking sound. No. Did you just say no to me? It's not for sale, Julian. It's not a resort. It's grandma's home. It's a memory. Something you can't monetize. I picked up my purse and turned to leave. I had taken 3 steps when Julian grabbed my arm. It was a mistake. A reflex kicked in, a combat reflex. Before I could stop myself, I had twisted my arm, breaking his grip, and stepped into his personal space, checking his balance. I stopped myself from driving my elbow into his throat, but the sudden, violent efficiency of the movement made him flinch. He stumbled back, his face flushing a deep, humiliated crimson. The whole room was watching. The millionaire had just been flinched by the help. He straightened his jacket, trying to regain his dignity, but his eyes were pure venom. He stepped close to me again, lowering his voice to a whisper so the lawyer couldn't hear. You think you're tough because you play soldier? He hissed, spit flying from his lips. You have no idea how the real world works, Danna. Money is the only weapon that matters. That land is mine. The resort is happening. If you don't sell, I will bury you. I will crush you like an ant. Is that a threat, Julian? It's a promise, he sneered, showing his bleached white teeth. You are the disgrace of the Roman name. Enjoy the cabin for the weekend. It'll be your last. I know I'm not the only one who has dealt with toxic family members who think their bank account gives them the right to treat people like dirt. If you have ever been looked down on by your own flesh and blood, or if you believe respect is earned, not bought, hit that like button right now and comment "not for sale" below to show them we aren't afraid. I walked out of the restaurant and into the Seattle rain. I didn't look back. But as I drove my rusted pickup truck toward the interstate, heading east toward the mountains, I couldn't shake the feeling of Julian's eyes boring into my skull. He thought he could crush me with lawyers and debt. He thought I was just a poor, stubborn woman. He didn't know he was about to poke a sleeping bear. And 3 days later, when the C4 went off, I realized just how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. The drive from Seattle to the Colorado Rockies is a 1,000-mile stretch of Interstate 90 and I-25 that cuts through the spine of America. For most people, it's a grueling commute. For me, it was the first time I had been able to breathe in years. My 1998 Ford F-150 rattled with every mile, the heater blasting dry, hot air into the cab to fight off the winter chill. The truck was a lot like me, beat up, high mileage, cosmetically rough, but it ran when you turned the key. I watched the landscape shift from the gray, suffocating drizzle of the Pacific Northwest to the vast open plains of Idaho, and finally to the jagged, white-capped teeth of the Rockies. Julian saw this land as a portfolio asset. He saw square footage, zoning laws, and potential ROI for his resort investors. When I looked at the mountains, I didn't see money. I saw cover. I saw high ground. I saw the only place left where the noise of the world couldn't reach me. In the military, we call it decompression. When you come back from downrange, from the sandbox in Syria or the valleys of Afghanistan, you can't just flip a switch and become a civilian again. You can't go from hunting high-value targets in the dead of night to standing in line at a Whole Foods arguing about the price of organic almond milk. If you try, you snap. You need a buffer. You need a place to let the adrenaline bleed out of your system before it poisons you. Grandma's cabin was my decompression chamber. I arrived as the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting long purple shadows across the deep snow. The cabin was in worse shape than I remembered. The front porch sagged like a broken jaw. The windows were covered in years of grime, and the roof had lost shingles to the harsh winter winds. To anyone else, it was a teardown. To me, it was a mission. For the next 48 hours, I didn't speak to a single soul. I worked. I woke up with the sun, drank scalding black coffee, and went to war with the decay. I chopped cord after cord of wood until my shoulders burned, and my palms, already rough, blistered and hardened. I climbed onto the roof to patch the leaks, fighting the biting wind that whipped my flannel shirt against my skin. I scrubbed the floors on my hands and knees until the wood grain shone through the dirt. There is a holiness in physical labor that men like Julian will never understand. Julian has never had a blister in his life. He has soft, manicured hands that have only ever lifted wine glasses and signed checks. He pays other men to sweat for him. He thinks power comes from status. He doesn't know that real ownership comes from bleeding into the soil you stand on. Every nail I drove into the wood was an act of reclamation. I wasn't just fixing a house, I was rebuilding myself. But the silence has a way of bringing up the things you try to bury. The physical exhaustion helps you sleep, but it doesn't stop the dreams. The second night, the nightmare came. It always starts the same way. I'm back in the alleyway in Aleppo. The smell hits me first. Diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and the copper tang of old blood. I'm moving toward the breach point. My team is stacked behind me. I give the signal. But when I kick the door, it's not a terrorist safe house. It's my grandmother's dining room. And they're all sitting there laughing at me. Julian, Aunt Linda, my parents. They're laughing, their mouths wide and distorted, and then the walls dissolve and the RPG hits. I woke up gasping, my hand instantly flying to the imaginary pistol under my pillow. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My sheets were soaked in cold sweat, despite the freezing temperature of the uninsulated cabin. It took me a full minute to orient myself. Colorado. You are in Colorado. You are safe. The threat is neutralized. I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the cot. The fire had died down to glowing red coals. The darkness felt heavy, pressing in on me. I reached into my rucksack and pulled out the small velvet box I kept hidden at the bottom, wrapped in a pair of wool socks. I opened it. The bronze star shone dully in the low light. It wasn't for valor in a movie-style charge. It was for meritorious service in a combat zone. For keeping my team alive when everything went sideways. My family calls me a failure because I don't have a corner office. They don't know I earned this while they were sleeping safely in their beds. I traced the edge of the metal with my thumb. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. I whispered the words of Psalm 23 into the empty room. It was the verse my grandmother used to read to me. It was the verse I whispered when the mortars started walking toward our position in Kandahar. I realized a long time ago that the valley isn't just the battlefield. Sometimes the valley is your own home. Sometimes the evil isn't a terrorist with an AK-47. It's the people who share your last name. I put the metal away. I couldn't dwell on it. Dwelling leads to spiraling. I was just putting a kettle on the wood stove when my satellite phone buzzed. It was a jarring digital intrusion in my sanctuary. I looked at the screen. Mother. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the red button. I should ignore it. But the conditioning runs deep. You answer when command calls. You answer when family calls. Hello, Mom, I said, my voice raspy from sleep and smoke. There was no greeting. No, hi, honey. No, did you make it there safely? Have you lost your mind, Danna? Her voice was sharp, piercing through the speaker. I closed my eyes and leaned my forehead against the rough log wall. Good morning to you, too. Don't get smart with me, she snapped. I just got off the phone with Linda. She is distraught. Julian is beside himself. How dare you? How dare you embarrass this family again? I didn't do anything, Mom. I just accepted what Grandma left me. You stole it, she screamed. That land belongs to Julian's vision. He's building something magnificent. He's the pride of this family, Danna. He's a success. And what are you? Playing hermit in a rotting shack because you're too stubborn to admit you're a failure? A failure, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. Is that what you think I am? Look at you. You're 38, no husband, no children, no career, real career, not that army nonsense. You have nothing. And now you're standing in the way of the people who actually contribute to this world. You are being selfish. Just like you were when you ran off to enlist. I enlisted to pay for college because you wouldn't, I said, my voice steady but quiet. We wouldn't pay for you to study art history. We invest in success. Julian is success. You are just difficult. You have always been the difficult one. She took a breath, and her voice dropped to a cold, commanding tone. Sign the papers, Danna. Send the deed to Julian. Stop humiliating us. Take the $5,000 and fix your truck. God knows it's an eyesore. Is that all, Mom? Do the right thing for once in your life, she said. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone. The silence of the cabin rushed back in, but it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt lonely. A crushing, absolute loneliness that comes from realizing the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally actually have a very specific set of conditions. I walked over to the small cracked mirror hanging by the wash basin. I looked at my reflection. I saw the faint white scar running along my jawline. A souvenir from a piece of shrapnel in Syria. That scar had healed years ago. It didn't hurt anymore. But the invisible wound my mother had just ripped open? That was bleeding. I splashed cold water on my face. I didn't cry. Tears are a waste of hydration. But inside, something hardened. A steel door slammed shut in my heart. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. If you want me to be the villain, I'll be the villain. I didn't know it then, but I would need every ounce of that hardness, because the phone call was just the psychological warfare. The kinetic warfare was about to begin. And the next time the phone rang, it wouldn't be my mother. It would be the only father figure I had left. I sat there for a long time, listening to the wind howl against the logs of the cabin. My mother's words were still echoing in the small room, bouncing off the walls like ricochets. Failure, disgrace, useless. It's a strange thing, how you can be bulletproof on a battlefield but made of glass in your own kitchen. I've taken shrapnel. I've taken concussions. I've taken the weight of life and death decisions that would break most men. But one phone call from the woman who gave birth to me, and I was 12 years old again, hiding in the closet, wishing I could disappear. I needed to talk to someone real. Someone who knew the Danna Roman that didn't exist in my family's photo albums. I reached into the bottom of my tactical rucksack and pulled out a heavy black device with a thick antenna. It wasn't a standard smartphone. It was an Iridium 9555 satellite phone, encrypted to military standards. It was the only way to communicate securely from this remote altitude, bypassing the local cell towers that Julian probably monitored. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It routed through a server in Virginia, then bounced to the Pentagon, before finally connecting to a private line in a home office in Arlington. It rang twice. "This line is secure," a voice answered. It was deep, gravelly, and sounded like sandpaper moving over concrete. It was a voice that had commanded divisions in Iraq and negotiated treaties in Brussels. "General," I said, my voice cracking slightly. I cleared my throat and straightened my spine, a reflex ingrained from 20 years of service. "It's Danna." There was a pause, and then the hardness in the voice melted away, replaced by a warmth that I had never heard from my own father. "Colonel Roman," General Higgins said, "I was wondering when you'd check in. How is the vacation? Have you managed to stop saving the world for 5 minutes, or are you organizing the local squirrels into a tactical unit?" I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. "I'm trying, sir. But the squirrels are undisciplined recruits." "Good to hear your voice, kid," he said gently. "And I don't mean kid disrespectfully, Colonel. You know that." "I know, sir." "The president asked about you this morning," Higgins said casually, as if he were discussing the weather. We were in the Situation Room briefing the fallout from the operation in Yemen. He wanted to know the name of the JSOC commander on the ground who made the call to abort the airstrike and go in on foot to save those hostages. I told him her name was classified, but that she was the best officer I've ever seen wear the uniform. I closed my eyes. The best officer. My mother had just called me a grease monkey. The cognitive dissonance was enough to give me a migraine. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. He wants to give you the Distinguished Service Medal, Danna, Higgins continued. When you get back to D.C., he wants a private ceremony in the Oval. No press, obviously, just the people who know. He said that kind of moral courage is rare in this town. I was just doing my job, General. And that is exactly why you are you, he said. The line went quiet for a moment. He knew me too well. He could hear the hesitation in my silence. Danna, what's wrong? You didn't call me on a secure line to brag about a medal you don't even want. What's happening out there? I looked around the dark, drafty cabin. I looked at my rough hands, the hands that my family thought were only good for changing oil. I'm tired, General, I whispered. I'm just tired. My family, they're pressing me. My cousin Julian wants the land. My mother called me a failure. They look at me and they see nothing. They see a mistake. They see what they are capable of seeing, Danna, Higgins said, his voice firming up. Small minds cannot comprehend big things. You are a Tier 1 operator. You command the most elite assets in the United States military. You speak 4 languages. You hold a master's degree in strategic studies. You're a ghost who walks through walls to keep this country safe. If they think you're a failure, that is an indictment of their intelligence, not your worth. I know, I said, picking at a loose thread on my jeans. Logically, I know that. But it still hurts. It shouldn't, but it does. Because you're human, Higgins said softly. Family is the one weakness we can't train out of you. It's the Achilles heel. You want their approval because it's biological. But listen to me, Danna. Listen to your old man. I'm listening. Blood makes you related, he said. Loyalty makes you family. I have seen men die for you who didn't share a drop of your DNA. I have seen you risk your life for strangers. That is your family. The people in that restaurant in Seattle, they are just civilians who happen to share a last name. Do not let them compromise your integrity. Julian threatened me, I admitted. He said he'd crush me like an ant. He said money is the only weapon that matters. I heard a low, dangerous chuckle on the other end of the line. It was the sound General Higgins made before he authorized an airstrike. Money is a powerful weapon, sure, Higgins said, but it's a clumsy one. Danna, do you remember the oath of office you took when you accepted your commission? Do you remember the words? Yes, sir, every word. Recite the first part for me. I took a deep breath, staring into the dying fire. I, Danna Roman, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Stop, Higgins commanded. Repeat the last 3 words. Foreign and domestic. Domestic, Higgins emphasized. That doesn't just mean terrorists building bombs in a basement. It means anyone who threatens the rights, the safety, and the sanctity of the life you have built. A tyrant is a tyrant, Danna, whether he speaks Arabic in a cave or English in a boardroom. If this cousin of yours is threatening you, if he is using fear and intimidation to take what is yours, he has crossed a line. You are not a civilian victim here, Colonel. You are a soldier on American soil. You have the right to defend your position. I don't want to hurt them, sir. You won't, Higgins said. You are a professional. You use the minimum force necessary. But do not let them mistake your restraint for weakness. If they bring a war to your doorstep, you finish it. Do you understand me? I understand, sir. Good. Now, I'm going to have my aide monitor the local chatter in that county. If things escalate, you call me. I can have a Black Hawk from Fort Carson on your lawn in 40 minutes. I think I can handle Julian, sir. He's just a bully in a suit. Bullies in suits hire men with guns, Danna. Watch your 6. I always do. I was about to say goodbye, to tell him thank you for being the father my own father never was when I heard it. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind. A low, high-pitched whine, like a mosquito, but mechanical. constant, rhythmic. My head snapped up. I looked toward the window. The sound was getting louder. Danna! Higgins's voice sharpened instantly. He heard the change in my breathing. What is it? Hold on, I said, moving quickly to the window. I stayed to the side of the frame, peering out into the darkness. There, hovering just beyond the porch light, was a red, blinking eye. A drone. A quadcopter, high-end consumer grade, rigged with a camera. It was staring right into the cabin. I've got eyes on a UAV, I said, my voice shifting. The sadness was gone. The hurt daughter was gone. The colonel was back. Small UAS, surveillance pattern. Someone is watching the cabin. Is it authorized? Higgins asked. Negative. It's peeking in my windows, sir. You are greenlit to engage, Colonel. Secure your perimeter. Copy that, I said. General, I have to go. I have uninvited guests. Give 'em hell, Danna. I terminated the call and set the satellite phone down on the table. The warm glow of the conversation faded instantly, replaced by the cold blue clarity of combat. Julian wasn't just threatening legal action anymore. He was conducting reconnaissance. He was watching me. I walked over to the corner of the room and picked up the Remington 870 shotgun I kept by the door. I racked the slide. The sound was loud, aggressive, and final. My mother thought I was useless. Julian thought I was weak. They were about to find out that they had severely underestimated the woman living in the woods. The vacation was over. The operation had just begun. Down at the base of the mountain, where the county road turned from paved asphalt to treacherous gravel, a black Porsche Cayenne Turbo sat idling. The engine purred with a low, expensive rumble, sending plumes of white exhaust into the freezing night air. Inside, the climate control was set to a tropical 72 degrees. Heated leather seats wrapped around the driver like a warm glove. Julian Roman took a sip of his cognac from a silver travel flask. He hated nature. He hated the cold. He hated the fact that his Italian loafers were currently resting on a rubber floor mat stained with mud. But most of all, he hated his cousin Danna. He adjusted the iPad mounted on the dashboard. The screen displayed a grainy night vision feed from the DJI Mavic drone hovering 300 feet above the cabin. Showtime, Julian muttered. He wasn't just watching, he was broadcasting. He had started a private FaceTime group call with the family back in Seattle. Can you see it? Aunt Linda's voice chirped through the car's surround sound system. Is that the shack? Good Lord, it looks like a pile of firewood. That's the one, Mom, Julian said, zooming in on the dark windows of the cabin. And inside sits the queen of the Roman dynasty, probably eating beans out of a can. Just get rid of her, Julian, his father's voice chimed in. The investors are getting impatient. We need to break ground in the spring. If she drags this out with probate court, we lose the window. Don't worry, Dad, Julian smirked, tapping the screen to maneuver the drone closer to the front porch. I hired the best. Viper's team is staging in the woods right now. But first, I want to have a little fun. I want to see her squirm. He typed a message on his phone. He wanted to document this. He wanted her to know exactly who had beaten her. Up in the cabin, the sound of the drone was like a drill pressing into my temple. It was the sound of the modern battlefield. In Syria, that sound usually meant you had about 10 seconds to find cover before a Hellfire missile turned your grid square into a crater. Here, in the Colorado wilderness, it meant something else. It meant harassment. I stood in the shadows of the kitchen, away from the windows. My Remington 870 tactical shotgun was in my hands. It wasn't a precision instrument like the sniper rifle, it was a blunt force tool. 12-gauge, pump action, loaded with number 4 buckshot. My phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up the dark room with a harsh blue glow. Sender, Julian. Timestamp, 11:42 p.m. I picked it up. The message was long, rambling, and dripping with the kind of confidence that only comes from men who have never been punched in the face. I'm giving you 1 hour, Danna. Pack your trash and drive away. If you're not gone by midnight, that cabin is going to catch fire. Old wood burns fast. I've already talked to the sheriff. He knows to look the other way. He thinks it's just a tragic accident waiting to happen. Don't be a hero. Be smart. Take the 5K and go back to the motor pool. I stared at the text. He wasn't just threatening eviction, he was threatening arson and admitting to bribery. He was documenting his own crimes because he truly believed the rules didn't apply to him. He thought the law was something poor people had to follow, while rich people just paid to bypass it. My thumb hovered over the keypad. A part of me, the civilian part, the cousin part, wanted to beg. I wanted to ask him why he hated me so much. I wanted to ask why money was worth more than blood. But the colonel didn't beg. The colonel assessed threats and neutralized them. I needed to give him one chance, not for his sake, but for mine. The rules of engagement, ROE, are sacred. You don't fire until you have exhausted all non-lethal options. You have to occupy the moral high ground before you take the tactical high ground. I typed a reply. Short, precise. Military. 2. Julian. Julian, this is your only warning. You are conducting an illegal surveillance operation and threatening domestic terrorism. Check your ROE. If your men breach my perimeter, I will view it as a hostile act and I will respond accordingly. Withdraw your team. Don't let greed get people killed. I hit send. Back down in the Porsche, Julian read the text and burst out laughing. He laughed so hard he spilled a drop of cognac on his silk tie. What did she say? Linda asked over the speakers. She's talking about ROE and hostile acts, Julian wheezed, wiping tears from his eyes. She thinks she's in a Tom Clancy movie. Check your ROE. God, she's so pathetic. She actually thinks she can scare me with army jargon. She's bluffing, his father said dismissively. She's a mechanic, Julian. She fixes Humvees. She's probably cowering under the bed right now. You're right, Julian said, his face hardening. I'm done playing games. She wants a hostile act? I'll give her a hostile act. He switched apps to a secure radio channel connected to the earpieces of the mercenaries waiting in the tree line. Viper, this is Gold Card, Julian said. Green light. I want her out, now. If you have to blow the front door off the hinges to scare the piss out of her, do it. Just don't kill her. I don't want the paperwork, but make sure she never wants to come back to Colorado again. Copy that, Gold Card, Viper's voice crackled back, breaching in 3 mics. Julian leaned back in the heated seat, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He tapped the drone controls again, dropping the altitude. Smile for the camera, Danna. I saw the red eye of the drone drop. It descended from the tree line, hovering right in front of the main bay window. It was close now. Too close. It was peering into my sanctuary, violating the only safe space I had left in the world. Julian had made his choice. He had ignored the warning. He had mistaken mercy for weakness. In the military, we have a saying. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked calmly to the front door and unlocked the deadbolt. I didn't open it yet. I just unlocked it. I wanted them to come in. But first, I had to blind the eye in the sky. I moved to the window. The drone was hovering there, buzzing angrily, the camera lens focusing on me. I looked straight into the lens. I wanted Julian to see my face. I wanted him to see that I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I raised the Remington 870. The pump action made a sound that is universal. Chick, chick. On his screen down in the valley, Julian must have seen the barrel rise. He must have seen the black hole of the muzzle. He probably had half a second to scream. I pulled the trigger. Boom! The shotgun roar was deafening in the small cabin. The window glass shattered outward, mixing with the cloud of lead shot. The drone didn't just break, it evaporated. 1 second, it was a piece of high-tech surveillance equipment worth $2,000. The next, it was a cloud of plastic shrapnel and sparking wires raining down into the snow. I pumped the shotgun again, ejecting the spent shell. It hit the floor with a smoking hiss. The buzzing stopped. The silence of the mountain returned, but now it was different. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first shot has been fired. The diplomatic phase was over. The kinetic phase had begun. I looked out into the darkness, past the smoking remains of the drone. I knew they were out there, Viper and his team. They had heard the shot. They knew I was armed. But they didn't know who I was. Not yet. I turned away from the broken window and walked back to my armchair. I picked up my coffee cup. It was still warm. "Come on in, boys," I whispered to the empty room. "Welcome to the funhouse." Down in the valley, Julian's screen went black. But up here, the night was just getting started. The silence that followed the shotgun blast wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that screams of impending violence. Outside, the wind whipped the snow into a frenzy, but inside the cabin, the air was still. The smell of gun smoke hung in the living room, sharp and metallic, masking the scent of old pine and dust. I didn't reload immediately. I didn't need to. I knew exactly how much time I had. They would be confused for about 30 seconds. Then they would check in. Then they would get angry. Then they would breach. I moved away from the broken window, stepping lightly on the balls of my feet, my boots making no sound on the hardwood floor. I reached into my tactical bag and pulled out a monocular device, a FLIR Breach PTQ-136 thermal imaging scanner. I didn't turn on the lights. Darkness was my ally now. I pressed the device to my right eye and scanned the tree line through the shattered glass. The world turned into a spectrum of grayscale and glowing white. There they were. 12 heat signatures. 12 white-hot ghosts standing out against the freezing black background of the forest. They were stacked up in 2 fire teams, moving in a bounding Overwatch pattern. They weren't moving like amateurs. They were spacing themselves out, checking their sectors. Julian hadn't just hired local thugs, he had hired private military contractors. I zoomed in. I could see the heat rising from the barrels of their rifles. I could see the outline of plate carriers and ballistic helmets. This was no longer a civil dispute. This wasn't a landlord-tenant disagreement. This was an armed paramilitary force maneuvering on American soil against a U.S. citizen. My heart rate slowed down. My breathing became shallow and rhythmic. The fear that I had felt earlier, the fear of my mother's judgment, the fear of losing my grandmother's legacy, evaporated. In its place, a cold, crystalline logic took over. I reached for the satellite phone again. I hit the redial button. "Higgins," the general answered on the first ring. His voice was tight. He knew. "Sir," I said, my voice flat. "I have visual confirmation. 12 hostiles, heavily armed, wearing body armor and carrying military-grade carbines. They are maneuvering to breach. This is a coordinated assault." "Are they law enforcement?" Higgins asked, though we both knew the answer. "Negative. No badges, no sirens, no announcement of authority. They are Black Tusk mercenaries operating under a private contract. Sir, this is a code red situation." There was a pause on the line. I could hear the general typing furiously on a keyboard in Arlington. "Danna," Higgins said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice of the man who held the authority of the executive branch. "You are a Tier 1 asset. You are a repository of top-secret state intelligence. If you are captured, national security is compromised. We cannot allow that to happen." "I have no intention of being captured, sir." "Good. Because I am looking at the legal framework right now. By attacking a senior officer of the United States Armed Forces with lethal intent, these men have classified themselves as domestic combatants. They are no longer citizens with rights. They are threats to the Constitution." I waited. I needed to hear the words. I needed the sanction. Not because I couldn't do it without permission, but because I am a soldier, and soldiers follow orders. "Colonel Roman," Higgins said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "you are authorized to defend your position. You are authorized to neutralize the threat. Weapons free. I repeat, weapons free. If you have ever felt the satisfaction of finally being allowed to take the gloves off and fight back against a bully, hit that like button right now and comment, 'Weapons free' below. Let's show them what happens when you push a good person too far." "Weapons free," I repeated. The words felt like a heavy weight being lifted off my chest. "Copy that, sir." "I am spinning up a QRF, Quick Reaction Force, from Fort Carson," Higgins added. Helos are spinning up now. ETA is 40 minutes. Can you hold out that long? I looked at the thermal signatures creeping closer to my porch. I looked at the traps I hadn't set yet. I looked at the terrain I knew like the back of my hand. 40 minutes? I let out a short, dry laugh. Sir, in 40 minutes, you won't need a reaction force. You'll just need a cleanup crew. Godspeed, Danna. Out. I set the phone down. I had 40 minutes. Most people, when faced with 12 armed killers coming for their life, would panic. They would scramble to find a hiding spot. They would hyperventilate. They would pray. I walked into the kitchen. I picked up the old dented kettle my grandmother had used for 30 years. I filled it with water from the tap. I struck a match and lit the propane burner on the stove. I set the kettle down and watched the blue flame lick the bottom of the metal. I reached into the cupboard and pulled out a box of black tea. I placed a bag in my favorite mug. This wasn't arrogance. This was psychological warfare. This was Jocko Willink's philosophy made manifest. Bad situation? Good. They have more men? Good. More targets to hit. They have better gear? Good. I can take it off their bodies when I'm done. They think I'm weak? Good. Surprise is the ultimate force multiplier. I wasn't going to rush. Rushing leads to mistakes. Rushing leads to noise. I had time. The snow was deep, and they were moving cautiously, expecting traps. They were right to expect them. The kettle began to whistle, a soft, rising tone that cut through the silence. I poured the water. The steam rose up, smelling of comfort and civilization. I took a sip. It was scalding hot, burning my tongue, grounding me in the present moment. Julian wanted a war. He wanted to play soldier. He thought writing a check to a mercenary company made him powerful. He didn't understand that writing checks doesn't teach you how to stop bleeding. It doesn't teach you how to move through the dark without disturbing a single molecule of air. It doesn't teach you how to kill without hate, simply because it is the necessary task at hand. I set the tea down on the counter. I rolled up the sleeves of my flannel shirt, revealing the scars on my forearms. Okay, Julian, I whispered, my eyes adjusting to the darkness of the hallway. You paid for the full experience, now you're going to get it. I didn't put on body armor. Armor slows you down. Armor makes you feel safe, and feeling safe gets you killed. I needed speed. I needed violence of action. I walked to the closet by the back door. I opened it. Inside wasn't a broom or a vacuum cleaner. Inside was a pelican case I had buried under a pile of old blankets. I popped the latches. Inside lay my MP7 submachine gun, compact, silenced, deadly efficient. And beside it, a bandolier of flashbang grenades. I picked up the MP7. It felt light in my hands, like a toy, but I knew it could punch through a Kevlar helmet at 200 yards. I checked the magazine, full. I slung the weapon over my shoulder and picked up the flashbangs. The thermal scanner showed the first team was now 20 yards from the porch. They were stacking up on the door I'd already blown open. They were whispering commands into their radios. They were walking into a fatal funnel. I took one last sip of tea. Welcome to the Rockies, gentlemen, I said. I moved into the shadows, merging with the darkness. I wasn't Danna Roman, the poor cousin, anymore. I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the mechanic. I was the apex predator. And feeding time had just begun. 40 minutes is a lifetime in tactical terms. In 40 minutes, governments can fall, treaties can be signed, and lives can be extinguished. But for a Tier 1 operator, 40 minutes is something else entirely. It is a luxury. It is enough time to turn a battlefield into a slaughterhouse. I moved with the economy of motion that had been drilled into me at Fort Bragg. Panic is wasted energy. Every step I took in that cabin was calculated. I didn't run around like a frantic victim in a horror movie. I moved like a mechanic entering a workshop. First, I went to the mudroom, where I kept my rucksack and my emergency roadside kit. I pulled out a bundle of Orion road flares, the heavy-duty kind used by truckers on interstate pileups. They burn at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit and produce a blinding, sputtering red light that sears the retina. I carried them to the kitchen island. I wasn't going to use lethal explosives. General Higgins had authorized weapons free, but my personal code and the tactical reality of the situation dictated something else. Killing 12 men creates a mess that not even the president can clean up easily. But breaking them, terrifying them until they wet their pants, that sends a message that lasts longer than a funeral. I opened the pantry. My grandmother was a woman of the Depression era. She never threw anything away. The shelves were lined with glass ball mason jars, empty and waiting for next season's strawberry jam. I grabbed 4 of them. Next came the flour and the sugar. To a civilian, these are baking ingredients. To a combat engineer, they are particulate fuel. When dispersed into the air and ignited, fine flour dust creates a rapid combustion, a dust explosion. I wasn't trying to blow the roof off, but I wanted a flash. I wanted noise. I wanted shock and awe on a budget. I worked quickly. I used duct tape, the silver, heavy-duty kind found in every American toolbox, to tape 3 road flares together. I stripped the safety caps. I rigged a simple pull-wire trigger using high-tension fishing line I found in Granddad's tackle box. I placed the flare bundle inside the mason jar, packed it tight with a mixture of flour and magnesium shavings I scraped from a fire starter block. It was crude. It was ugly. It was an improvised stun grenade that would make an OSHA inspector have a heart attack. But it would work. I placed the jars at strategic points, one by the back door, one in the hallway, and 2 right inside the main entrance taped under the floorboards where the wood had rotted away, hidden from sight but ready to be triggered by a tripwire running across the threshold. Trap construction complete. Time elapsed, 12 minutes. Next phase, environmental control. I walked down the creaking wooden stairs to the basement. The air down here was musty, smelling of damp earth and old cardboard. The breaker box was mounted on the far wall, a gray metal sentinel humming with electricity. I looked at it. This box was the heart of the cabin. It powered the refrigerator, the heater, the lamps that made this place feel like a home. Julian and his men would expect a warm, lit house. They would expect to look through the windows and see me cowering in the corner. I reached up and grabbed the main master switch. "Lights out," I whispered. I yanked the lever down. Thunk. The hum died instantly. The refrigerator compressor shuddered and stopped. The pilot light on the water heater winked out. The cabin above me plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. Now, the advantage was mine. I climbed back up the stairs, navigating by memory. I didn't need light. I knew every knot in the wood, every loose nail, every squeaky board. This house was in my blood. I went back to the living room and reached into my Pelican case. I pulled out my final piece of gear, a set of L3 Harris GPN VGI-18 panoramic night vision goggles. These weren't the cheap, green-tinted monoculars you buy at a surplus store. These were quad tubes, giving me a 97-degree field of view. They turned the pitch-black room into a crisp, white phosphor daylight. I strapped them on and flipped them down. A soft electronic whine filled my ears as the tubes energized. The room exploded into clarity. I could see the dust motes dancing in the air. I could see the grain of the wood on the table. To Viper and his men outside, the cabin was a black void, a terrifying maw waiting to swallow them. To me, it was a brightly lit stage. I picked up my MP7 and walked to the armchair facing the front door, the door I had already blown open, which now hung on one hinge, swaying slightly in the wind. In tactical terms, this spot is called the fatal funnel. It's the cone of death where bullets naturally converge when entering a room. Usually you avoid sitting here. But tonight, I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be the first thing they saw when they turned on their flashlights. I sat down. I crossed my legs. I rested the suppressed submachine gun across my lap, my finger indexed along the receiver, not on the trigger. I checked my watch. 28 minutes remaining until the QRF arrived. The mercenaries were early. I sat in the silence, and my mind drifted back. Not to the war, but to a Christmas dinner 5 years ago. I remembered sitting at the kids' table, even though I was 33, because there wasn't enough room at the main table for the non-partners. My father had walked by, holding a scotch, and looked at my uniform hanging on the coat rack. "You know, Danna," he had said, his voice slurring slightly. Julian just closed a deal worth $40 million. He's building skyscrapers, he's building a legacy. What do you build? You just fix things that other people break. What have you actually earned in your life besides a bad back and some PTSD? I hadn't answered him then. I had just stared at my mashed potatoes, feeling the shame burn my cheeks. What have I earned? I looked around the dark cabin, seeing it through the high-tech lens of my goggles. I have earned the ability to slow my heart rate to 45 beats per minute while 12 men hunt me. I have earned the knowledge of how to turn a jar of jam and a road flare into a weapon of mass disorientation. I have earned the skill to sit in the dark and not be afraid of the monsters, because I know that I am the thing that goes bump in the night. Julian bought his power. He inherited his safety. But safety is an illusion. When the lights go out, when the police don't come, when the laws of civilization break down, net worth means nothing. The only currency that matters is survival. And in that economy, I am the wealthiest woman in the world. Crunch. The sound was subtle, barely audible over the wind, but the electronic amplification of my headset picked it up instantly. Snow compressing under a heavy boot. Crunch, crunch. They were on the porch. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I watched the heat signatures through the open doorway. 2 men, then 4. They were stacking up on either side of the frame, moving with practiced discipline. They had their rifles raised, lasers cutting through the swirling snow. I saw Viper's hand signal. Breach. One of the men reached out and pushed the broken door all the way open. It creaked loudly, a sound like a coffin lid opening. A beam of blinding white light from a rifle-mounted flashlight cut into the room, sweeping left, then right. It illuminated the dust, the debris, the empty fireplace. And then, the beam hit me. I sat there in the chair, the 4 lenses of my night vision goggles looking like the eyes of a giant spider, glowing faintly. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my weapon. I just sat there, framed in their light, looking like a demon waiting on a throne of shadows. The point man froze. The light wavered. Contact front, he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Living room. Individual in the chair. Take the shot, Viper's voice hissed in their earpieces, loud enough for my amplified hearing to catch. But they didn't shoot. Because deep down, in the lizard part of their brains, they knew. You don't walk into a dark room and find a woman sitting calmly in a chair unless she has already won. I smiled beneath the goggles. Did you bring the eviction notice, boys? I asked softly. And then, with a flick of my thumb, I pulled the fishing line taped to the armrest of the chair. Click. The trap by the door ignited. The retreat was not orderly. In military terms, it was a rout. Down at the bottom of the gravel driveway, Julian Roman watched through the windshield of his Porsche as the tactical team he had paid $50,000 for came stumbling out of the smoke-filled woods. They weren't moving with the precision they had shown 10 minutes ago. They were sprinting, slipping on the ice, looking over their shoulders as if the devil himself were snapping at their heels. Julian frowned, lowering his iPad. The drone feed had cut out minutes ago, leaving him blind. But he had expected to see Danna being dragged out in handcuffs, or at least weeping on the porch. Instead, he saw his elite mercenaries looking like terrified children. What the hell is going on? He muttered, popping the door of the Porsche open. The freezing wind hit him instantly, biting through his Italian wool suit, but his anger was hotter than the cold. He stepped out into the snow, his expensive loafers sinking into the slush. Viper, the team leader, reached the bottom of the hill first. He was panting, his face smeared with soot, his eyes wide and wild. He was missing his helmet. He was ripping off his tactical vest as he ran, as if the gear itself was burning him. Stop, Julian screamed, stepping in front of the fleeing man. Where do you think you're going? Get back up there. Viper didn't stop. He tried to shoulder past Julian, heading for the black SUVs parked behind the Porsche. Julian grabbed him. It was the arrogant move of a man who had never been in a physical confrontation in his life. He grabbed a man who killed for a living by the lapel of his jacket. I am talking to you, Julian shouted, slapping Viper across the face. The sound was sharp, a wet crack in the silent night. You incompetent moron! I paid you to clear the house. Go back in there and drag that bitch out. The slap was a mistake. Viper didn't cower. He didn't apologize. He snapped. The fear that Danna had instilled in him transmuted instantly into rage. He grabbed Julian by the throat, lifting him off his feet, and slammed him backward onto the hood of the Porsche Cayenne. Crunch! The metal buckled under the impact. Julian gasped, the air knocked out of his lungs. He stared up into Viper's face and saw something he had never seen before. Unadulterated panic. You didn't tell me, Viper screamed, spit flying into Julian's face. You didn't tell me who she was. She's a mechanic, Julian wheezed, clawing at Viper's hand. She's nobody. Nobody. Viper slammed Julian's head against the hood again. Blood began to trickle from Julian's nose, staining his white dress shirt. She's JSOC, you idiot. She's Tier 1. I saw the patch. I saw the way she moved. She rigged that house like a kill box in Fallujah. Julian's eyes fluttered. He didn't understand the acronyms. He didn't know what Tier 1 meant. All he knew was that his employee was assaulting him. I'll sue you, Julian choked out. I'll ruin you. You won't have time to sue anyone, Viper roared, letting go of Julian and backing away as if Julian were radioactive. Do you have any idea what you just did? You just ordered a hit on a high-value federal asset. That's not a lawsuit, Julian. That's treason. That's a black site prison for the rest of your life. Viper turned to his men, who were piling into the SUVs, throwing their weapons into the back seats. Move! 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 Viper screamed. Leave the gear. Just drive. We need to be out of the state before she makes the call. But I paid you, Julian shrieked, sliding off the hood of his ruined car, blood dripping onto the snow. You can't leave me here. You're on your own, rich boy, Viper spat. He jumped into the lead SUV. Pray she doesn't kill you. Engines roared to life. Tires spun on the ice, throwing gravel and slush onto Julian's suit. In seconds, the taillights of the mercenary convoy disappeared around the bend of the mountain road, leaving Julian alone in the silence. He stood there, shivering, wiping the blood from his nose with a silk handkerchief. His heart was pounding. He looked up at the cabin. It was dark, silent. Cowards, Julian whispered, his voice trembling. Useless cowards, I'll do it myself. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a snub-nosed .38 special revolver. He had bought it for protection years ago and never fired it. It felt heavy and cold in his hand. He turned toward the cabin. Danna, he screamed, his voice echoing off the valley walls. You think you won? You think you can scare me? The front door of the cabin opened. It didn't explode. It wasn't kicked down. It just opened, slowly and deliberately. Danna stepped out onto the porch. She wasn't wearing body armor. She wasn't holding a machine gun. She was wearing her flannel shirt, jeans, and work boots. In her hand, she held a steaming mug of tea. She looked like she had just stepped out to enjoy the fresh air, not like a woman who had just single-handedly routed a 12-man paramilitary squad. She walked to the edge of the porch railing and leaned against it, looking down at him. She was 50 yards away, but in the crisp mountain air, she felt right next to him. You're bleeding, Julian, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried perfectly. It was calm, terrifyingly calm. Shut up. Julian waved the gun around wildly. Get off my property. This is my land. I have the deed. I have the lawyers. Danna took a sip of her tea. She didn't even look at the gun. It's not your land, Julian. It never was. And those lawyers? They can't help you now. I'll sue you for everything, Julian yelled, his composure completely fracturing. He was crying now, tears of rage and humiliation mixing with the blood on his face. I'll sue you for assault. I'll sue you for using illegal military weapons. You're a criminal. You're a psycho. I didn't use any weapons on your men, Julian, Danna said softly. I used fireworks and flour. They ran because they know what I could have used. You're lying. Julian took a step up the hill, raising the gun. I'm going to end this. I'm the head of this family. I say what happens. Danna set her tea mug down on the railing. She looked at him with a mixture of pity and boredom. Julian, put the gun down. Make me. I don't have to, Danna said. She raised her hand and pointed a single finger toward the sky. They will. Who? Julian sneered. The sheriff? I own him. Not the sheriff, Danna said. Listen. Julian froze. At first, it was just a vibration in his chest, a deep rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from the air itself. Thwop, thwop, thwop. It grew louder, fast. The snow around Julian began to swirl, whipped up by a sudden, violent wind coming from above. The trees bent and groaned. The sound became deafening, a mechanical roar that drowned out Julian's screams. He looked up. From over the ridgeline, two dark shapes crested the mountain. They were massive, black, predatory birds of prey. Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawks. They didn't have civilian registration numbers. They had the dark, matte finish of the United States Army. And then, the sun came out at midnight. Click. A spotlight from the lead helicopter slammed onto Julian. It was blindingly bright, millions of candle power focusing on one man in a ruined Italian suit holding a cheap pistol. Drop the weapon! A voice boomed from a loudspeaker system that shook the ground. Drop the weapon and get on the ground, now! Julian dropped the gun as if it were red hot. He fell to his knees, covering his eyes, cowering in the snow. Danna stood on the porch, bathed in the peripheral glow of the spotlight. The wind from the rotors whipped her hair back, but she didn't move. She picked up her tea mug again. She looked down at her cousin, who was now curled into a fetal ball, sobbing into the dirt. You wanted a war, Julian, she said, her voice lost in the roar of the rotors, but her meaning clear in the way she looked at him. You forgot one thing. I don't fight wars alone. She took a sip of tea, watching as the side doors of the Black Hawk slid open, and men in real tactical gear, with real authority, prepared to descend. I told you, she whispered to herself. I don't need to sue you. I just need to report you. The landing of a Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk is not a subtle event. It is a declaration of overwhelming force. The rotor wash hit the ground with the force of a hurricane, whipping the snow into a blinding white vortex. To Julian Roman, cowering in the slush with his hands over his ears, it felt like the apocalypse. To me, it felt like the cavalry arriving. The side doors of the lead chopper slid open before the wheels even touched the frozen earth. Ropes dropped. Men slid down. Fast, efficient, lethal. These weren't county deputies with beer bellies. These were military police and tactical FBI agents from the Denver field office, moving with the synchronized fluidity of a wolf pack. They wore heavy plate carriers, ballistic helmets, and carried M4 carbines with holographic sights. Federal agents! A voice boomed over the roar of the engines. Nobody move. Hands where we can see them. Julian scrambled to his knees, his face a mask of blood and snot. He tried to point at me. Officer, thank God, that woman. She's crazy. She has bombs. Arrest her. Two agents were on him instantly. They didn't ask questions. One kicked his legs out from under him, sending him face first back into the snow. The other drove a knee into his lower back. Julian Roman, the agent shouted, pulling Julian's wrists behind his back. The metallic snick-snick of handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had heard all night. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism and violation of the Federal Espionage Act. What? Julian screamed, spitting snow. I'm a developer. I have rights. Do you know who my father is? You have the right to remain silent, the agent recited, hauling him up. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As Julian was being dragged toward the perimeter, a convoy of headlights cut through the darkness at the bottom of the hill. 3 luxury SUVs skidded up the icy driveway, fishtailing wildly. It was the family. My parents, Julian's parents. They had driven up from the hotel in town, expecting to watch the grand finale of my humiliation. Julian had invited them to see the squatter get evicted. They got a show, all right, just not the one they bought tickets for. Julian, Aunt Linda shrieked, stumbling out of her Escalade in a fur coat. Get your hands off him. He's a Roman. He's a citizen. My mother saw me standing on the porch. She didn't see the helicopters or the federal agents. She only saw her daughter, standing tall while her favorite nephew was in handcuffs. Her wiring, conditioned by decades of prejudice, short-circuited. She charged up the steps, her face twisted in rage. "Danna!" she screamed over the dying whine of the rotors. "What have you done? You called the police on your own family. Have you no shame? Look at your cousin, you animal." My father was right behind her, his face red. "You ungrateful little brat. We offer you money, and this is how you repay us? By ruining Julian's reputation? I swear to God, Danna, you are dead to us." I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just took a sip of my tea. "Step back, ma'am," an MP commanded, stepping between my mother and me. He held his rifle at the low ready. "Don't you tell me what to do," my mother spat. "My taxes pay your salary. I want to speak to your superior. I want this mechanic arrested for assault." "You want to speak to the superior?" The voice came from the darkness. It wasn't loud, but it had a gravity that sucked the oxygen out of the air. The circle of soldiers parted. General James Higgins walked into the light. He wasn't wearing a dress uniform. He was wearing operational camouflage pattern fatigues, his combat boots crunching softly on the snow. On his chest, the 4 silver stars of a general glinted in the spotlight. He walked past Aunt Linda. He walked past my screaming mother. He didn't even look at them. To him, they were less than civilians. They were background noise. He walked straight up the steps. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. The silence that fell over the clearing was absolute. Even Julian stopped struggling. General Higgins snapped his heels together. He raised his right hand in a slow, crisp, perfect salute. "Colonel Roman," he said, his voice ringing out clearly. "Mission accomplished. Are you secure?" My parents froze. Their mouths hung open. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. "Colonel." I set my tea mug down on the railing. I straightened my back. I returned the salute, cutting the air with the precision of 20 years of discipline. "I am secure, General," I said. "Hostiles neutralized. Perimeter holding." "At ease, Danna," Higgins said, dropping his hand and smiling warmly. "Colonel?" my father whispered, his voice trembling. "What? What did you call her?" General Higgins turned slowly. He looked at my parents for the first time. His eyes were cold. "I called her by her rank, Mr. Roman," Higgins said. "Colonel Danna Roman is the commander of Task Force 121, Joint Special Operations Command. She's a Tier 1 operator and one of the highest decorated officers in the United States military." "But," my mother stammered, clutching her pearls, She's a mechanic. She fixes trucks." Higgins laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "She fixes problems, ma'am. Problems that threaten the safety of this nation. While you were sleeping in your heated mansions, your daughter was hunting down terrorists in caves. She has saved more American lives in a week than your entire family has in a century." He took a step toward them. My father actually recoiled, intimidated by the sheer presence of the man. "And you," Higgins pointed a gloved finger at Julian. "You authorized an armed paramilitary assault on a federal asset. Do you know what the penalty is for treason, son? It's not a fine. It's a dark room for the rest of your natural life." "We didn't know," Aunt Linda sobbed. "We just wanted the land." "You wanted to steal," Higgins corrected her, his voice dripping with disgust. "You judged this woman by the clothes she wears. You treated a hero like garbage because she didn't worship your money. Well, look around you." Higgins gestured to the Black Hawks, the armed soldiers, the FBI agents securing the scene. "This is her world. This is the respect she commands. You are lucky, Mr. and Mrs. Roman. You should get on your knees and thank God right now." "Thank God for what?" my father asked weakly. "Thank God that Colonel Roman is a disciplined soldier," Higgins said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Because if she were anyone else, she would have put a bullet in your nephew's head the moment he stepped onto this property. And she would have been legally justified to do so." My mother looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in 38 years, she didn't see the disappointment. She didn't see the grease monkey. She saw the scars on my hands. She saw the way the soldiers looked at me with reverence. She saw the general standing by my side like a protective father. And she saw the absolute, unbridgeable distance I had placed between us. Danna, she whispered, reaching a hand out toward the porch. Baby, I didn't answer. I picked up my tea. General, I said, turning my back on them. My tea is getting cold. Would you like a cup inside? I would be honored, Colonel, Higgins said. He followed me into the cabin. The door closed behind us with a solid final thud, shutting out the wind, the snow, and the sobbing of the people who used to be my family. Spring in the Colorado Rockies does not arrive with a whisper. It arrives with a roar of melting snow. The rivers swell, the aspen trees explode into a vibrant, trembling green, and the air loses that metallic bite of winter, replacing it with the scent of wet pine and thawing earth. It had been 6 months since the night the Blackhawks landed in my front yard. 6 months since the snow was stained with Julian's blood and the flashing lights of federal SUVs. I stood in the center of the living room. The shattered front door had been replaced, this time with reinforced steel clad in reclaimed oak. Beautiful, but bulletproof. The floorboards where I'd hidden the flashbang traps were new. The fireplace, where I'd once sat waiting for a kill team, was now crackling with a gentle, warming fire, not to keep me alive, but to keep the coffee pot warm. The cabin wasn't just a cabin anymore. It wasn't the shack my mother had sneered at. Nor was it the 5-star resort Julian had tried to steal. It was something far more valuable. I walked over to the mantel. Above it, framed in simple wood, was a picture of my grandmother. Next to it was a new sign, hand-carved by a former Marine combat engineer who had lost his left eye in Fallujah. It read, "The Roman Sanctuary. Forward operating base for the broken." We didn't charge admission here. We didn't have investors. This place was funded by my savings and a quiet grant arranged by General Higgins. It was a place for the guys and girls who came back from the sandbox with their limbs intact but their souls chipped. A place where they didn't have to explain why loud noises made them jump or why they couldn't sleep without facing the door. I picked up the envelope sitting on the mantel. It was white, stark, and stamped with the ominous seal of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The return address was USP Florence High, a federal penitentiary about 2 hours south of here. It was from Julian. I had let it sit there for 3 days. Part of me, the old part, the part that still craved some twisted form of family validation, wanted to know what he had to say. The other part, the colonel, knew exactly what it was. Intelligence gathering. Manipulation. I slid my thumb under the flap and tore it open. The handwriting was shaky. Julian's penmanship, usually full of arrogant flourishes, looked small and cramped. "Dearest cousin Danna," it began. I almost laughed. 6 months ago, I was a grease monkey and a disgrace. Now I was, "Dearest cousin, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing to you from a place of great humility. The lawyers tell me that my appeal is stalled. They say the federal prosecutors are making an example of me because of the nature of the incident. Danna, you have to help me. I am not built for this. The food is inedible. The people here are animals. I am a businessman, Danna, not a criminal. It was a misunderstanding. I got bad advice. Please, if you speak to your general friend, maybe he can pull some strings. Maybe get me moved to a minimum security facility. We are family, after all. Blood is thicker than water. Please don't leave me to rot in here." I lowered the paper. He hadn't changed. Not really. Even in a concrete cell, stripped of his Italian suits and his Porsche, Julian was still the same man. He didn't apologize for sending men to kill me. He didn't ask how I was. He only cared about his own comfort. He still thought family was a currency he could spend to buy his way out of consequences. He was right about one thing, though. Blood is thicker than water. But he forgot the full quote. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we choose are stronger than the biology we inherit. I looked at the fire. The orange flames danced and licked at the grate. I didn't feel angry anymore. The rage that had fueled me that night in the snow was gone, burned away by the realization of my own worth. I didn't hate Julian. I just pitied him. He was a man who had everything and possessed nothing. He had millions of dollars, but no honor. He had parents who enabled him, but no one who would stand by him when the check bounced. "Goodbye, Julian," I whispered. I tossed the letter into the fire. It landed on a burning log. For a second, nothing happened. Then the corner curled black. The paper caught. The blue ink of his desperate handwriting turned to smoke. I watched until it was nothing but gray ash, floating up the chimney to be scattered by the mountain wind. The last tether to the Roman dynasty was cut. I wasn't Danna the disappointment anymore. I was just Danna. "Colonel?" A voice called from the front porch. It was deep, gravelly, and cheerful. I turned away from the fire. "Coming, Sarge." I grabbed my mug of coffee and walked out the front door. The sun was just cresting the peaks of the Rockies, painting the snow-capped summits in brilliant shades of pink and gold. The air was crisp, filling my lungs with the clean taste of freedom. On the porch, the family was gathering. There was Mike, a former Army Ranger with a prosthetic leg, sitting on the steps throwing a tennis ball for his service dog, a golden retriever named Buster. There was Sarah, a medic who had done 3 tours in Iraq, flipping pancakes on a portable griddle set up on the railing. There was Ghost, a quiet sniper from my old unit, simply leaning against a post, watching the tree line with a peaceful smile on his face. They looked up when I stepped out. "Coffee's fresh, Colonel," Sarah said, flipping a pancake onto a paper plate. "And Mike brought the good bacon this time, not that turkey crap." "Hey," Mike protested, grinning. "My cholesterol is a work in progress." "Morning, Danna," Ghost said, nodding slowly. He didn't salute. We didn't do salutes here. We did nods. We did handshakes that lasted a second too long because we were just glad the other person was still alive to shake back. I looked at them. They didn't share my last name. They didn't know my grandmother. They didn't care about my bank account or the property value of this land. They knew the scar on my jaw. They knew why I checked the perimeter before I slept. They knew the weight of the things we carried in our rucksacks and in our heads. This was the inheritance I had been fighting for. Not the land, not the wood and stone of the cabin, but this. The right to build a sanctuary for the people who mattered. "You okay, boss?" Mike asked, sensing the shift in my mood. He stopped throwing the ball. I looked at the smoke rising from the chimney, carrying Julian's ashes away. I looked at the sunrise illuminating the faces of my brothers and sisters. "Yeah, Mike," I said, a genuine smile breaking across my face. The first real, unburdened smile I had felt in years. "I'm better than okay." I walked down the steps and sat on the bench next to them. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted like victory. My mother had told me I was useless. Julian had told me I was alone. They were both wrong. I was the richest woman in the world, surrounded by the only wealth that actually holds its value when the world goes dark. "So," I said, looking at the map spread out on the picnic table, "who wants to help me build the new deck today? I think we need more room for the view." "I'm in," Sarah said. "Hand me a hammer," Mike said. "Always," Ghost said. The wind blew through the pines, singing a song of spring, of renewal, and of peace. The war was over. The winter was gone. And for the first time in my life, I was finally, truly, home. Thank you for standing watch with me through this long night. My story proves that your true worth isn't defined by your bank account or your relatives' opinions, but by the steel in your spine and the people in your corner. If you believe that justice is best served cold and with a side of tactical precision, please hit that like button and share this story. It helps us find more people who need to hear it. And if you want to join a community that values loyalty over legacy, subscribe to the channel right now. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to fire your own family to find your peace? Let me know. Stay safe, stay dangerous. Danna out.